All right, good afternoon. Welcome to Glendale City Council Workshop Session of January 12th, 2021. Meeting is called to order. I'll conduct an attendance roll call. If you'll please signify your attendance by saying present. Councilmember Oldama?
Present.
Councilmember Clark?
Here.
Councilmember Hugh?
Here.
Councilmember Tomachoff?
Here.
Councilmember Turner? Vice Mayor? And the chairman's present. Councilmember Turner is present. He didn't have his microphone on, so everyone is here. Okay, moving on. Workshop. Ms. Bauer, would you introduce item number 1, please?
Council item of special interest, consideration of creating a street renaming policy.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. Welcome back to the start of the new year. Our first presentation will be led today by our Director of Transportation, Trevor Eversole, and he'll be joined as well with Don Bressler, who's our Chief Capital Improvement Officer.
Thank you, Mr. Phelps, Mayor and Council. We're here today to, as a result of a council item of special interest presented to us on a September workshop by Vice Mayor Malinar in regards to, with the interest of street renaming or creating a street renaming process. So what Mr. Bessler and I are going to present to you today is basically we're hoping to achieve or establish a set of goals and desired outcomes for this draft policy. So what we want to do, as I stated, we want to develop a clear and transparent street renaming process with defined roles for the residents, the administration, and the city council. To ensure the address is following, or ensuring the process addresses the following, we want to cover the level of support by affected parties. We want to talk about the fees for the applicants. We want to talk about the remuneration, the timeline for reconsideration, non-contiguous streets sharing the same alignment. We want to ensure that or talk about maintaining the Glendale's autonomy and implementation impacts, including the MAG and Postal Service, emergency response, and et cetera. So our timeline that we're striving to get this back to you with the draft policy is at the February 23rd workshop. That might be a bit aggressive, but that's what we're shooting for. And we're estimating that, oops, I'm sorry, I'm a slide ahead. The workshop presentation is focused on the approved goals to vet the guidance prior to the drafting of the policy and to draft the policy reflecting the workshop consensus. Now, our timeline is to come back to you on the February 23rd workshop, and we anticipate that the staff hours associated with this draft policy will be about 20 hours. Our requested action of council is to approve the goals and authorize the city manager to proceed with drafting the policy. Mayor and council, that's the end of our presentation. I'd like to open it up for either consensus to move forward drafting the policy or questions.
Mr. Milner. Go ahead, you got it.
Let's try this one. All right, so last fall I had several residents who approached me and had requested a name change policy or a name change of a certain street. And when I looked into it, I asked staff to, what is our policy? How do we do that? And they basically came back and said, we have no policy in place to be able to do that from a resident's request. So I simply suggested that we, as a council, look into developing a policy to allow that to happen and the process in which it should follow. So that's basically why we're here today, is to discuss if we want to create a policy that would be in place for that type of process to happen. So with that, we'll just turn it over to the council to decide if this is something that we want to move forward on.
Mayor?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I can support looking into a policy creation, but I have a question. So can staff bring back, if this goes through, bring back an inventory of signs that may be offensive in nature that we have out there? They're perhaps named after individuals that are offensive, or a place or thing that's offensive. That would be good to know. I think there's one sign out there that may have triggered this request, but nonetheless, I am for creation of a policy.
Yeah, he's bringing one to you. Here you go.
I looked at this and I thought, really, what it is, it's a solution in search of a problem. And there are I can't remember a request from a citizen to change the name of a street. I know that we have done it as a council, honorarily naming some streets after people of import, but quite frankly, I don't think it's necessary. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Tomachoff.
Mayor- Thank you, Mayor. Can I ask Councilmember Mulder, how many people have you heard from requesting a street name change?
There's been about 6 requests.
And do any of them reside, they all reside in Glendale? I'm sorry, Mayor, I need to go through you, but. Mayor, I'd like to ask him, do they reside on the street where they'd like to have the name changed, or they live on another street?
No, I don't believe they live on the particular street.
I just, I mean, I understand, and I know, another city has changed the name of probably the street that we're talking about. But if I lived on that street and had to redo, everything with the new address when I didn't even move, I don't know if I, it does say that it would have to be a consensus of the people who lived on the affected street. Does level of support, but I don't know, I mean, I guess that would be part of a workshop if you brought it back to a workshop.
Yes, and I believe that's exactly what they're asking us to give them authority to go back and draft and bring that back to workshop and have a discussion about what that would be.
So I would be willing to continue the discussion. I don't know whether I would be supportive of it, but I would be willing to continue the discussion, at least to take a look at it.
Mayor, thank you. Yeah, I'm confused from the discussion so far as to whether the concern is we don't need a policy regarding renaming streets, or we don't foresee that we have any need to rename streets. And while you mull that over, I will say that I do support moving forward with the item of interest to see about developing a policy if the council should so choose.
And I guess I'll put my 2 cents in. We've had 3 occasions now since I've been here, just here over 8 years, that we've actually changed names of streets. 2 of those was an honorary name change. The street stayed the same. The other one, we actually changed the name of Cardinals Way on an area where there was no businesses, no homes, no nothing. There was no cost involved. To me, that was a pretty simple change. I don't honestly think that we need a policy, because we basically, I think we've done a pretty good job in the past when this has come up and people have asked us to look at these things. Again, I think it might be looking for a problem that I don't think we really have, but I don't see any damage in at least pursuing it, looking at it. I don't think our question today is a particular street name change. I think it's the policy. I don't know as though we need a policy. But I certainly don't, I'm not going to fight it. If we want to pursue looking at that for a workshop, I have no problem with that. Anyone else? Okay, so is there a consensus for them to come back with recommendations for a policy?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
No.
All right, very good. Thank you, Mr. Eversole.
Thank you.
Item number 2.
5-year forecast of the major funds.
Mayor, members of the council, here to provide the next report will be led by our Assistant City Manager, Vicky Rios, and our Budget and Finance Director, Lisette Camacho.
Good morning, Mayor, members of the council. This presentation has 3 parts. We have the budget overview. In the first section, we'll be going over the property tax levy. We will be needing council consensus on the levy for primary and secondary property tax. The second section of the presentation is an update on actual results for revenues and expenditures for all the major funds. We'll cover the general fund, the special revenue funds, and the enterprise funds. Then the last part of the presentation is on the 5-year financial forecast. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Lindsay.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. The first slide that we have here is the budget calendar for the fiscal year 21-22 budget process. The top item, which is highlighted in red, is today's date, which is when we will be discussing the 5-year financial forecast and some other items, as Ms. Camacho mentioned in the previous slide. Our next 2 meetings, which will occur in February, will focus on general obligation bond-funded CIP projects. March, we will be focused on other CIP project prioritization. So there's a lot of focus on the CIP in the calendar this year. We have council workshops all day in April to discuss the fiscal year 22 operating budgets for the departments. Our final budget workshop is going to take place on April 20th. And the 3 meetings that you see in bold at the bottom are the items in the budget calendar that have legally required deadlines. We schedule our calendar so that the legally required deadlines are much earlier than what is required by law. This allows for flexibility in the calendar if needed. The tentative budget adoption is scheduled for May 11th, 2021. This is when the maximum expenditure limitation is set upon adoption of the tentative budget. The legal requirement for tentative budget adoption is on or before the third Monday, in July of each fiscal year. Final budget adoption and discussion of the property tax levy is scheduled for June 8th, 2021. Legal requirements for final budget adoption is the first Monday in August, with at least 14 days between the adoption of the final budget and the adoption of the tax levy. And the adoption of the property tax levy is scheduled for June 22nd, 2021, and the legal requirement for final tax levy adoption is the third Monday in August. There are additional requirements for publications that are built into the schedule as well. This slide just is a general visual of the budget process itself. Staff prepares the 5-year financial forecast, which we will be discussing today. The departments and the finance department and the city manager's office work to develop base operating budgets. We also work to develop and balance the capital improvement program. We present the draft budget to council. Council then adopts final budget. Staff prepares the budget book, and we go back into 5-year financial forecast. The slide before you shows the components of the budget. Generally, our focus is around the discussion on general fund. That kind of takes up the majority of our discussion every year. Revenues, for Glendale, city sales tax and state shared revenue are two primary sources of revenue. We continue to monitor all revenues closely, especially city sales tax and state shared revenue. Operating budgets are day-to-day costs such as police and fire operations, personnel costs, utility, neighborhood programs, et cetera. The capital improvement program or capital outlay is improvement to streets, water lines, sewer lines, parks, and other city facilities. They're generally non-routine in nature and cost more than $50,000 and have a useful life of at least 5 years. Debt service is the principal and interest on the city's debt. We have several types of debt service: general obligation bonds, which are serviced through secondary property tax, HERF bonds, which are serviced through HERF funding, excise tax debt, which is serviced through general fund excise taxes, transportation debt, which is serviced through dedicated transportation sales taxes, water and sewer debt, which is serviced by the water and sewer utility, and we have landfill debt, which we do not have any current outstanding debt. However, we anticipate issuing debt for the closure of the south quadrant of the landfill and relocation of the north quadrant. The last component of the budget is contingency, which is used for unforeseen expenditures and emergencies. It's an appropriated line item and not a reserve fund or savings account, such as fund balance. The general fund has $3 million assumed in the forecast, and other funds and capital project funds have methodology for contingency as well. This slide just demonstrates what we consider to be a balanced budget. So revenues and fund balance exceeding expenditures for operating the CIP, debt service, and contingency. The city's financial policy on property tax states, to ensure ongoing general fund stability, the primary property tax levy will be evaluated each year to determine where it should be set. This next slide demonstrates the various percentages that are made up within a citizen's property tax bill. The red circle on the left is schools and is the largest component of the total tax bill at 62%. The yellow and gray circles are the two percentages that go to the city of Glendale. The yellow circle is City of Glendale primary property tax, which accounts for 4% of the total tax bill. And the gray circle is City of Glendale secondary property tax, which is voter approved, and this category accounts for 13% of the total tax bill. The total percentage of the tax bill that goes to the City of Glendale is 17%. This example is for a home with a full cash value of $339,000. Glendale's primary and secondary tax rates are listed in red in the example. The combined rate, both primary and secondary, is $1.85 in 2019 and decreases to $1.80 in 2020. So increases in the tax bill are due to increased taxes in other categories, schools, counties, or special districts, or increased property value, or a combination of both. So for this particular example, the property tax bill went up by $83.70. The primary levy is the amount of revenue collected per the adopted property tax rate. Council has the option every year of increasing the primary tax levy by a maximum of 2% annually, which is the legally allowable limit. This example uses the fiscal year 21 adopted property tax levy for both primary and secondary property tax and applies a 2% increase to the primary levy only. This is a simple example just to demonstrate a 2% increase to the primary levy. It does not assume any new construction or increased value or increase in assessed valuation or property values. The amount of general fund revenue generated by a 2% increase would be approximately $118,735. This next slide, our chart shows the cumulative effect of increasing the primary tax levy by the 2% maximum allowable amount. Fiscal year 16-17 was the first year that council opted not to increase the levy, and council has not increased the levy for the past 5 years. The cumulative amount for fiscal year 21-22 would be just shy of $700,000, and the total amount of unrealized revenue from fiscal year 16-17 through fiscal year 21-22 is approximately $2.4 million. And again, back to the property taxes, the primary levy limit, if it's increased by the 2%, it covers any general fund expense. The legally allowable increase is 2% per year. And again, the cumulative increase is just shy of $700,000. And at this point, we're looking for council consensus on increasing the primary tax levy by 2%.
You're calling on me? Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. I have a question. Do you have an example, or have you looked at how much our actual levy dollar amount has increased based on properties being added to the property tax rolls? And in addition to that, to the increase in assessed values? Because we should be collecting more property tax without, it should be higher than, year over year. Do we have any examples of that?
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Tolmachev, we looked at historical increases due to growth or new properties being added to the tax roll. On an average, it's about 1%.
Mayor, if I could continue. We had maybe they haven't actually gone on the property tax, but we've had quite a few large construction projects that should have, they weren't even in the city of Glendale. We annexed quite a few parcels in, and I know that's going to continue. So, are we projecting that that's going to increase also to a higher number than 1%? We saw something somewhere recently where we were anticipating a pretty big jump in property tax. I don't remember when that was presented due to annexations and construction in our MPA.
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Tolmachev, we've looked at the historical aspect of it, but we can certainly take a look at it again. Over the years, it does fluctuate, some 2%, some 1%, but on average, it's 1%, but we could certainly take a look at it again and get back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor?
Yeah, go ahead.
The staff is asking us for consensus for the 2% increase in the primary tax levy. And I know the past 5 years, we have, this council has decided not to increase that levy and to leave it flat, or in the case of property values going up, actually reducing the levy. I continue to be in favor of not increasing our primary tax levy. I'm quite proud of not taxing our citizens $2.4 million over the last 5 years. I know we could always use the money. There's always somewhere to spend money. There's always somewhere to spend money. But this is one of the few places that we have given relief to our taxpayers. And I think it is well worth continuing to provide that relief to our taxpayers in the primary tax rate. And I know the secondary rate is for voter approved, and if the voters approve any kind of increase, then they choose to do that. But we have the choice of not increasing the primary tax rate, and I am not in favor of increasing it to the allowable 2% increase per year, which is allowed under state law, I believe. Thank you, Mayor.
Mayor,
Councilmember Clark.
I concur completely with Vice Mayor Malnar's remarks. I too will not support an increase in the primary property tax levy. I believe that, especially in light of today's financial situation, it would be an unnecessary burden on our citizens during a time when they are struggling to get by financially through the COVID crisis. So I, too, concur with the Vice Mayor and will not support an increase in the levy.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, I should have said that I don't support it, but the point I was trying to make is, I think we've added enough to the property tax roll, and with the increased assessed values, which we obviously don't have any control over, we're going to see a bigger increase than we would even if we, which I don't support, but even if we increase it by 2%, we're continuing to add to the property tax roll. So that's why I wanted to see that number, and I do not support increasing the property tax levy.
You.
Thank you, Mayor. I know we've kind of stuck together on this for quite a while, not increasing that part of the property tax. I know you look back and you think all the things we could have done if we have been going up 2% every year, but unless there's a big change, yeah, I'd rather just hold it where we are right now, Mayor. Thank you.
Bill Doma.
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, last year during budget session, I asked for the council and our administration to look at steps into reducing the sales tax, and that wasn't supported, so I certainly wouldn't ask to raise the property tax. So I, too, today am not in favor in raising it and going forward as is. Thank you.
Sure.
Well, it's one of those situations, Mayor, where everything's been said, but not everybody's had a chance to say it. So I shall take my chance. It's been at least 5 years, maybe 6, since we utilized the opportunity to increase the property tax by that 2%. At the last time that we did it, 5, 6 years ago, I feel like it made sense, but it hasn't, because we didn't know what our picture was going to look like coming out of the recession and whether we were going to have essential services at risk. But each year our financial situation, due to the hard work of this council and the good advice we've received from staff, our situation has improved. We haven't had to do it, and I think we're in a better financial footing than we've been in probably close to 20 years, and I don't see any necessity to raise the property tax rate. Thank you.
Mr. Phelps.
Mayor, members of the council, again, yeah, thanks for the input. I want to just kind of clarify one thing. The staff wasn't coming forward with a recommendation to increase by 2%. We just needed direction to make sure that the assumptions we were building into our budget were consistent with council policy. We've recognized for some time this has been an effective tool for the city in terms of controlling the growth of property taxes. And so I know it may not have been framed exactly that way, but we weren't coming forth with a recommendation. Certainly, we're not. We knew that the council was very unified in terms of holding back, and I think it's something Glendale and its citizens can be quite proud about, the fact that for a number of years now, we've not increased, which means actually our levy rate has decreased. As Councilmember Tomachoff has mentioned, we continue to grow our base. So just want to be a clarification on that. We, from an administration perspective, we're consistent with that, supporting that policy as well.
Thank you, Mr. Phelps. I'm not going to speak for the rest of the council. I didn't assume that they were pushing for an increase. I felt that they were simply reminding us that we have that option if we choose to use it. I think most of the council feels the same way. We don't really have a need for it. I mean, it's always nice to have the money, but anything that we can do to give our citizens a break somewhere, I think sends a very strong message. You know, six years in a row now that we haven't increased our primary tax, and Glendale's growing. So I think it sends a good message. So I think you have your answer there. It's pretty much unanimous.
Thank you.
This next slide shows the secondary property tax history. It shows the secondary property tax amount collected over the past 7 years. The amount remains relatively flat and has only increased due to new property added to the tax roll. And secondary property tax exclusively pays for general obligation bond debt service.
Mayor, members of the council, we'll turn over this slide here to Ms. Rios.
Thank you, Ms. Camacho. Mayor, members of the council. I just wanted to continue this discussion a little bit because of the upcoming budget process. As the council and most of the citizenry probably know, we had a bond election back in November, and those bond questions were voted no. The consensus of the public was not to go forward with those. And so we did build that now into some models, and so when we bring the CIP forward to the council, we are going to spend time again with you going through an exercise to help prioritize the general obligation bond projects, because we don't have the authority for some of the things that we thought that we might. We'll be coming back to the council, and there'll just be an increased emphasis again this year, as there was a few years ago, on prioritizing these projects. The assumption is, along with the primary tax, as Mr. Phelps mentioned, that in the secondary tax we'll also keep that levy flat. You can see, as the prior chart showed, that it does grow slightly every year. It's a very big number, so it takes a lot of added property to make it grow 1%, because it's already a really big number. It's 1% of a very big number, if you want to think of it that way. So our plan is to bring the CIP back to you, sort of broken down by funding source, so that within each funding source we can discuss the available funding and what projects council would like to prioritize, starting again with general obligation bonds, which we'll spend time with you on February 2nd and February 16th. And then we'll break down the rest of the capital plan into other components, again, sort of keeping it by funding source or by department. So we'll start, we'll discuss with you the general fund, and then transportation, HERF, and the enterprise funds. And then by March 2nd, we should have gone through each different part of the CIP within each one's funding source, and we'll bring that all together back to the council as a draft CIP. So I just wanted to kind of lay that out with you, because I think this year, again, we need to spend some time. The capital budget is a very large portion of this budget, and so we want to make sure that we spend the time necessary for council to work through what projects should be prioritized. We are seeking, as we did on the primary, your consensus to keep that secondary tax levy flat. I think that's been the policy of the council. We just want to confirm that with you and allow you to have that same discussion.
Thank you, Mayor. So I just want to make sure I understand. So the CIP discussions are going to revolve around the capacity that we have because the bond election failed, or are we going to be using, assuming that the bond, I'm not sure I understood the way you phrased that. I want to make sure I get it.
So, Mayor, members of the council, we're going to show you sort of both. We anticipate that the council may decide that they want to go for another bond election in 2022. And we see that what we'll need to do is kind of show the council and the public what projects could be funded if you had that authority. So we'll walk you through what we have available and prioritize with what we have available, what happens between now and 2022, and then also show you with another bond election what could be done. So it'll be a combination of both.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. I do have a council item of special interest around that that I'm going to be asking for today to amend my previous request about the survey. So I'll save it for that on exactly how we did bond elections in the past. So, but I do have I'm going to change it to something a little bit different. But I wanted to make sure I understood. So we're going to be looking at, and things can be moved and changed, obviously, if the bonds are approved. But we're going to be looking at both scenarios when we go through this exercise.
Yes, as
Okay.
Mayor, members of the council, as you'll recall, kind of our process for doing the CIP is we create a 10-year CIP. We normally consider that the first 5 years of it are funded. In this case, when it comes to general obligation bonds, we had needs within those first 5 years that were identified during the last budget process for that bond election. So we'll need to reprioritize what occurs over the first 2 years before, with the authority that we have, because we did not receive that additional authority. But beyond that, we'll show you a combination of what you can do with the existing authority and what you might be able to do with additional authority.
Okay, thank you.
And we're good on consensus to keep the levy flat. Good, thank you.
Mayor, members of the council, this section of the presentation will cover actual revenues and expenditures through November for fiscal year 2021. Total general fund revenues are on target at 100 million. Revenues increased by about 4% or 4 million over the same time last year. City sales tax revenues are about the same as last year at 51.6 million. The next two slides after this one will cover in detail the sales tax revenues by categories. State shared revenues consist of 3 different categories: state shared income tax, state shared sales tax, and vehicle license tax. State shared income tax is based on income tax collected from 2 years ago. So the collections for fiscal year 2021 are for collections in 2019. So state shared income tax is not affected by the pandemic. State shared income tax increased 11% or 1.5 million over last year. State shared sales tax increased 10% or 1 million over the same time last year. And vehicle license tax increased 12% or about 500,000 over the same time last year. Fees, license, and permit fees are at 7.6 million. It increased 16% or about 1 million over the same time last year. The increase in fees, license, and permits revenues are driven by growth in building permits and also franchise fees revenues. Arena fees are the revenue sharing received from fiscal year 2020. It was received in October of fiscal year 2021. So the 836,000 you're seeing here on this slide is the revenue for fiscal year 21. Other revenues are at 8.4 million. It's about 11% lower or about $1 million lower than the same time last year. And that's because of one-time revenues from sale of assets. The 8.4 million revenues through November does include proceeds from the sale of Glen Lakes.
Mayor, members of the council, I just wanted to remind, as we look at the sales tax, we are talking about our actual collections through November, but that means that that's the business activity through October because of that 1 month lag. So if you're kind of trying to think about the economy and things that have happened, just keep in mind that these numbers through November for city sales tax is the business activity through October. Thank you.
Vice Mayor?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. You mentioned in other revenues was the proceeds from the Glen Lake sale. Are the proceeds from the Bank of America also in there?
Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Aldama, the proceeds for the Bank of America sale is in the fiscal year 1920 revenue, so it's included in that 9.4 million.
9492, okay, thank you.
As Ms. Rios stated, the slide that you're seeing here is actual sales tax revenues through November for fiscal year 2020 and fiscal year 2021. It is a comparison of the 2 years, and what it's illustrating is that you're seeing the impact of the pandemic on restaurant and bar, which is the light brown color you're seeing on the top there, and also on the hotels, which is the dark brown color in the bottom, and also the green pie slice for amusement. As you can see in the graph to the right, fiscal year 2021, the pie slice for restaurant and bar, hotels, and amusement, they've gotten smaller. And you really see the impact in amusement because you don't see that green, dark green pie slice anymore. It also shows that retail sales and construction The pie slices for those two categories have gotten larger in fiscal year 2021. So the increases in retail sales and construction are offsetting the losses in restaurant and bar, hotels, and amusement. This slide is the same information, but it's in a table format. Again, you're seeing that amusement is about 85% or 1.6 million lower than last year. The same thing for hotels is 25% lower or about 327,000 compared to the same time last year. Restaurant and bar is about 15% lower or 1 million lower than the same time last year. You can again see construction and retail sales. They're both coming in really strong, 30% higher than last year for construction and about 9% higher than last year for retail sales. Expenditures will be on target if they are close to about 40% of the annual budget. Through November, expenditures for general fund are at 90.7 million. It is on target at 40% of the annual budget. Personnel services are slightly below target at 38% of the annual budget or 63.4 million. That's because of the hiring freeze and reduction in temporary staffing that the city implemented as a response to the economic uncertainty brought on by the pandemic. Services and supplies are on target at 16.9 million or 41% of the annual budget. Moving on to Highway User Revenue Fund. Total revenues are above target at 7.6 million. Total revenues increased 1% or 74,000 over the same time last year. Highway user revenues are slightly lower than the same time last year at 7.1 million. Fees, license, and permits are at 416,000. It's up 31% or 97,000 over the same time last year, and that's due to increase in barricade permit fees. Other revenues are at 96,000, increased almost 200% at 63,000 over the same time last year. And the increase in other revenues are due to increases in auction revenues and also insurance reimbursement for claims. Capital outlay is significantly below target at 1.4 million, or about 18% of the annual budget. Capital outlay is typically spent unevenly throughout the fiscal year, and most of the time, most of the expenditures occur at the second half of the fiscal year.
Mayor, Lisette, if you'll go back, please, to general fund expenditures, and under personnel services, so 63.4 million, that's what it's costing us for staff, and it's slightly lower. Can you tell us how much we have in vacancy savings? Do you know what that dollar amount is specifically?
The estimated salary savings through November for the general fund is about 3.3 million. I would like to point out that what we're seeing right now is that some departments like public safety, police, and fire are going over budget because they have a more direct response to the COVID-19 pandemic, but other departments are also going below target or under budget. So we're keeping an eye on it, but we're thinking that we'll either be just below target or below budget by the end of the fiscal year.
Mayor, if I may, thank you, Lisette. And that's where I was going with the COVID crisis. Are we using the vacancy savings for public safety for overtime needs? And it sounds like, yes, that's what we're doing. Can we get a benchmark on that before our budget season starts? What is left of the 3.3 million?
Mayor.
An outlay of what we're going to do with the remaining dollar amount?
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Aldama, yes, we can certainly come back with an update on the salary savings.
Thank you. It's always useful to have what the vacancy savings is, where it went to, and then what we're doing with it. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mayor.
Mayor, thank you. As long as we're looking, if we could go back one more slide to general fund sales tax, update the revenues. We touched on construction revenue, which is self-explanatory, but retail sales is up over 9%. Is that actually an increase in retail activity, or is that a result of the Wayfair lawsuit or taxation on internet sales?
Mayor, members of the Councilmember Turner, it's a combination of the both of them, so yes, you are correct.
Okay, thank you.
Total transportation sales tax revenues are above target at 13.8 million. Revenues increased about 1% or 169,000 over the same time last year. City sales tax is at 13.3 million. It increased 2% or 272,000 over the same time last year. There are no transit revenues collected through November. This is due to a temporary hold on collecting transit revenue during the pandemic. The fares are estimated to be reinstated when other cities like City of Phoenix and City of Peoria reinstate their transit fares. Other revenues are at 417,000. Other revenues decreased by about 11% or 50,000 over the same time last year. And that's due to less interest income in fiscal year 2021. As far as the expenditures for transportation sales tax, expenditures are significantly below target at 7.6 million or 21.5% of the annual budget. That's primarily due to capital outlay. It's significantly below target at 3.6 million or 17.2% of the annual budget. Personnel services are below target at 1.6 million or 33.9% of the annual budget. Again, that's due to the hiring freeze and reduction in temporary staffing. The salary savings for transportation is estimated at 225,000 through November. Services and supplies are significantly below target at 1.5 million or 19.7% of the annual budget. And that's due to reduction in transit invoices from the City of Phoenix from the AC CARES Act funding received by the department from FTA. Public safety sales tax.
Yeah, before she moves on the transit sales tax update, what was that amount that that we were received a reduction in our invoice due to the CARES Act? Do we have the dollar amount for that?
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Tolmachev, let us take a look at it and we can provide an answer as we go through the presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Public safety sales tax for police. There are no budgeted expenditures in this fund, and all uses are accounted for as it transfers to the general fund. So the transfers for fiscal year 2021 will match exactly the budgeted amount. Same thing for the public safety sales tax for fire. Again, there are no budgeted expenditures in this fund, and all uses are accounted for as transfers to the general fund, and the transfer amount for fiscal year 2021 will match exactly the budgeted amount. Through November, total water and wastewater revenues are above target at 46.9 million. Revenues increased 9% or 4 million over the same time last year. Water and wastewater revenues are at 44.5 million. It increased about 9% or 3.6 million over the same time last year. The increase is due to an increase in consumption from the hot and dry summer that continued into the fall. Fees, license, and permits revenues are at 1.6 million. It increased over 100% at an increase of 837,000. That increase is due to increase in development impact fee revenues. Other revenues are at 800,000. That's a decrease of about 36% or 445,000 over the same time last year. And the majority of that decrease is related to collection fees revenues and also interest income. Through November, water and wastewater expenditures are below target at 37.3 million or 31% of the annual budget. Again, this is primarily due to capital outlay, which is significantly below target at 14.7 million or 23.7% of the annual budget. Personnel services, like the other funds, are also below target at 8.2 million or 36% of the annual budget due to the hiring freeze and reduction in temporary staffing that the city implemented. The estimated salary savings for water and wastewater through November is 728,000. Services and supplies are also below target at 10.6 million or 37.7% of the annual budget.
Mayor?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Camacho, under water and sewer revenues, do you have, not for right now, not for today, but do you have a sewer breakout? How much we collect for just sewer?
Mayor, members of the Councilmember Aldama, yes, we do have that, but let us take a look at it and we can provide an answer.
Okay, thank you. And then I believe sewer rates are established between January and April, is that correct?
Mayor, members of the council, it's based on consumption in January. I believe that is
January.
correct.
Okay. If you can get that back to us, I'd like to see what just the sewer revenue is.
Mayor, members of the council, we can certainly break it out by water and sewer revenue. Sewer fees are based on the winter consumption for the bills issued in January, February, and March. But the bills issued in January, February, and March are from the usage in December, January, and February. So customers who are wanting to, try to decrease their sewer bill should be mindful of their water usage during December, January, and February. However, having said that, if a customer has a leak in one of those months or has to fill a pool or do something unusual and does have unusually high consumption during those months, they just need to contact customer service and they'll be happy to provide, do a sewer adjustment for them based on their circumstances.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Mayor, members of the council, before I move on to solid waste, the decrease in the transit invoices from the city of Phoenix is about $1 million. Total solid waste revenues are on target at 8.2 million. Total revenues increased by about 4% or 300,000 over the same time last year. Residential sanitation revenues are at 6.2 million. It increased slightly by 75,000 over the same time last year. Commercial sanitation revenues are at 1.8 million. It increased 12.7% over the same time last year. The total of the increase is about $200,000. Other revenues are at 206,000. That's an increase of about 14% or 25,000 over the same time last year. Through November, solid waste expenditures are below target at 8.5 million or 37.9% of the annual budget. Again, that's primarily due to capital outlay, which is below target at 1.4 million or 22.6% of the annual budget. Personnel services are also below target at 2.4 million or 38.7% of the annual budget, again, due to the hiring freeze and reduction in temporary staffing put in place by the city. The estimated salary savings for solid waste is 71,000. Services and supplies are above target at 3.1 million or 44% of the annual budget. Total landfill revenues are above target at 5.2 million. Revenues increased by about 32% or 1.3 million over the same time last year. Tipping fees are at 3.3 million. It increased about 45% or 1 million over the same time last year. And the increase is due to the flat rate that the landfill established and also additional tonnage. Recycling fees are at 268,000. That's an increase of about 114% or 143,000 over the same time last year. And that increase is really just due to timing of the sale of the recyclables. The landfill was holding recyclable inventory until they could take advantage of higher pricing. So a lot of the sales, or the bulk of the sales, occurred in July, and that's why you're seeing that increase of over 100%. Other revenues are at 1.6 million. Other revenues increased about 6% or 97,000 over the same time last year. Through November, landfill expenditures are significantly below target at 4.3 million or 20.6% of the annual budget. Again, that's due to capital outlay that is significantly below target at 700,000 or 6.3% of the annual budget. Personnel services are also below target at 1.3 million or 34.3% of the annual budget. The estimated salary savings for landfill through November is 172,000. Services and supplies are also below target at 1.5 million or 34% of the annual budget. That concludes the presentation on the actual revenues and expenditures through November for the major funds. I'll pause here to see if City Council has any additional questions. If not, I'll move on to the 5-year forecast. Before I move on to the 5-year forecast, I would like to answer Councilmember Aldama's question on the sewer revenue. For the total sewer revenues are at about 15 million through November, and then for water revenues, it's at 29.5 million.
Mayor, if you can repeat that, my pen wasn't working, I'm sorry.
Sewer revenue is 14.9 million. Water revenues, 29.5 million.
Thank you.
Five-year forecast is the first step in the budget process development. Usually the long-term financial planning that we use and also that considers economic conditions and future spending is a best practice that provides insight to the city's future financial capacity and ability to deliver core services and also to achieve financial sustainability. It's a tool that can be used to foresee and prevent financial challenges in the future, and it's also useful when we're communicating with our rating agencies. When we're developing the 5-year forecast, we're looking at data and collecting data from various sources. We do look at the forecast provided by the Arizona Department of Revenue to ensure that our city sales tax and state shared revenue assumptions are in line with their assumptions. We also look at information published by the Arizona League of Cities and Towns, the Arizona Joint Legislative Budget Committee, or JLBC, the Department of Transportation for Highway User Revenue Funds, and also the City of Glendale historical data. We look at trends. Most of the time we look at 5 years, but at times we go back more than that, up to 10 years. And lastly, we look at comparable cities. The 5-year forecast also highlights the financial trends for the major funds like the general fund, the water and wastewater, solid waste, landfill, and also the special revenue funds, public safety sales tax, highway user revenue fund, and transportation. The general fund revenue assumptions are listed on this slide. As far as city sales tax, we did forecast moderate growth in fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 23. It does assume a partial recovery in fiscal year 22, so for the second half of the year, and a full recovery in fiscal year 23. We did a more conservative growth assumption in fiscal year 24 through fiscal year 26. Our forecast is more conservative than the Joint Legislative Budget Committee, or JLBC, report. And that's because if you saw in the actual revenues report, city sales tax was up about 0.5%, but state shared revenues were up about 11%. So we're seeing that city sales tax is impacted more by the pandemic, so it is something that we're continuing to look at and monitoring. State shared sales tax, our forecast is consistent with the Department of Revenue report. State shared income tax, as I said earlier, it's based on state income tax collected 2 years ago. So for fiscal year 2022, we did reduce our estimates because that's when you would see the impact of COVID-19 and the pandemic. And we built in a slow recovery from fiscal year 23 through fiscal year 26. We also included one-time sales tax revenues for mega events like the Super Bowl, and we've updated the repayment from the Arizona Sports and Tourism Authority for the Camelback Ranch. The next thing is on the general fund expenditure assumptions. I just want to remind council that these are just assumptions and they could change throughout the budget process. Council will formally adopt the final capital improvement plan and the operating budget, and these items will move forward or come through City Council one more time, if not, several times during the budget process. We did include in the assumptions building maintenance reserve. We added another $500,000 in fiscal year 2022, so it increased from $1 million to $1.5 million. And then we budgeted $2 million in fiscal year 23 through fiscal year 26. There is a placeholder for parks maintenance of $500,000 each year for the 5 years. Also a placeholder for the arena capital repair and maintenance of $1.2 million in fiscal year 2022, and then $500,000 for fiscal year 23 through fiscal year 26. The Camelback Ranch capital repair and maintenance, the budget for this fiscal year 2021, is about half of the $1.7 million, so there's a placeholder for double the amount so equal to $1.7 million each year. Vehicle replacement fund increased from $1 million to $2 million. Contingency was also increased from $2 million to $3 million. We continued funding for the police computer-aided dispatch and records management system project, and we assumed increases in risk management, workers' compensation, and shop charges. We also have a placeholder for the second medical response unit and expenditures for mega events.
Mayor? Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Camacho, can you explain why we went from $1 million to $2 million on the vehicle replacement fund? Is that due to cost for vehicles, or is that cost because of need of additional vehicles?
Mayor, members of the council, it is due to the cost of the vehicle. And also, in fiscal year 2021, we lowered the budget to $1 million because of the economic uncertainty. So we're restoring it back to its previous levels, which is $2 million every year.
Mayor, if I may, with the COVID crisis, do we foresee any changes on how we utilize our vehicles and our staffing, that we would need additional vehicles, or that we could reduce how many vehicles we have? Has that been considered before we increase $1 million?
Mayor, members of the council, we'd have to defer that question probably to either Mr. Friedline or Ms. Wakinko. So.
I think it's, Mayor, if I may, I think it's worth looking at, rather than because we used to be at 2 million, we're going to go back to 2 million. Is there a absolute need to do that? And I think it's worth taking a look at. Don't have to have the complete answer today, but I think it'd be worth it.
Mayor, City Council, the previous allocation last year, $2 million, I think was a reasonable number considering the financial situation Glendale's in and how to life cycle the cost of our vehicles to keep them in good operating condition, not keep them longer than we should, and dramatically increasing the maintenance costs. So I think it's a good cycle. The jury is still out on COVID. I appreciate what you're saying and understand it. We'll be looking at that over the next few months. I don't know whether that means we'll be doing more work inside our vehicle and away from the office, or just the opposite. But we are looking at that, and I'm sure that we'll make a lot of changes in that, based on how the COVID plays out over the next few months. We can also review at any time during the budget process our whole vehicle replacement program with the council if you so wish to do that.
Mayor, thank you, Lisanne. Thank you, Mr. Friedline. Yeah, I think that COVID, unfortunately, it's changed the way we do business, and it looks like the city is going to have to determine who can work from home long-term, even after COVID, and that could reduce the vehicle usage. But just a simple justification of the additional $1 million would be great, rather than just saying, and I know you don't mean to say it that way, but that's how it used to be. So I'd like to see a justification of an additional $1 million and where it's going to. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. I have actually two things here. One, I'd like to add on to Councilmember Aldama's questions along the lines of, I thought we had reduced the number of vehicles in our motor pool, and we were looking. I think we have a contract with rideshare. I understand now with COVID we're not doing that, and I'm wondering whether the increase is because we're moving towards electric vehicles, which are more expensive, and so how much of that can be attributed to. And I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that is, but I believe that we reduced the number of vehicles in our motor pool by a pretty significant number. So it does beg the question: how did we get from 1 million to 2 million?
Mayor, members of the council, if I can just add this, and I know Mr. Friedline also has something to say. This is not representative of the fleet, of just the motor pool. This is all of the vehicles, with the exception of high-priced fire trucks that are being replaced in the general fund. So you're talking about your police vehicles, your code compliance vehicles, they're all coming out of this funding source. So I just wanted to put that in some perspective for you. It's not just the motor pool per se vehicles. This is for police cars and all the other general fund funded vehicles. Park rangers, there's a number of vehicles that get funded from this $2 million. And I think Mr. Friedline had something to add.
Mayor, City Council, we can certainly add the things that we've done with reference to motor pool and electronic vehicles when we update the City Council on the justification.
Okay, thank you. I'd appreciate that. At least to have a discussion on, what if we're going to be moving in that direction. How much is it going to cost us? Or is the plan? I don't even know, to move in that direction citywide with all vehicles, and then what is the cost? So I think that topic's worthy of a discussion. My other question was, Mayor, if I could continue, is the park's maintenance number. Is that adding 500,000 year over year, or is that a 500,000 that was in a one-time add into the park's budget? It says each year, so I want to make sure that I understand what that means.
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Tolmachoff, year over year, so 500,000 each year.
So we're not adding another 500,000 this year to what we did, because we should have a significant amount of savings over the amount of money we were spending on Glen Lakes. That was 40 acres of maintenance. I know initially it was quite a large amount of money, but if there's savings there, I would like to see that money be moved into parks maintenance and not spent someplace else.
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Tolmachoff, the funding for Glen Lakes was added as a one-time cost. It wasn't added as an ongoing cost or to the Parks and Recreation budget. And it actually ran out in June. And so Mr. Burke and his organization have been absorbing that cost in the interim through some of those savings that you mentioned. And I just want to make sure we understand, again, Ms. Camacho's answer. This is $500,000 added to that budget, but it's not 500 and then another 500 and then another 500. It's 500 that was added as an ongoing. And again, it's just a placeholder. Those supplementals that justify and show you what that 500,000 would be being spent on will come through as part of the budget process. This is just an assumption that's in there in terms of the forecast.
Mayor, I can appreciate that. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't clear, first of all, whether we were adding another 500 over and above what we budgeted for last year. But we were budgeting for the Glen Lakes maintenance for the last several number of years. I know it was initially around 300,000 or 400,000, somewhere in there, the cost, with the contractor included in that cost. So, I mean, at least we can move the discussion to when we actually have the budget meetings, but I would like to see whatever we were spending there at I would like to see that go into the parks maintenance. I think that's what our whole idea of eliminating that cost was, is that could be better spent citywide on other parks. So I know that's a conversation for another day. I just wanted to make the point.
Thank you. And I misunderstood. I thought that you had said it was 500,000 and then another 500, and so that caught my interest. Mr. Phelps.
Mayor, members of the council, so again, this assumption is built on prior conversations that we've had over really the last couple of years with the council about a desire to increase the level of daily maintenance on our parks. That includes things of painting benches, replacing, pagodas. So what we had just done, and we had heard clearly from the council that they'd like to see us be able to perform a higher level of park maintenance. And so we just, in our assumptions, we assumed that the council would want to fund that. And so we've increased the base amount that we typically would spend in our maintenance budget by an additional $500,000. But we'll go into more detail with that during the actual budget presentation. But this assumption was really derived from numerous conversations that we felt we've heard from the council of a desire to improve the level of parks maintenance, whether it be at our community centers, our recreation centers, our actual parks. We still have a long way to go. This $500,000 increase, in our mind, doesn't get us to the to the ultimate goal, I think, where we want to be at. But it does, as Vicki and staff mentioned, this is kind of a placeholder to begin discussions, and then the council will have the ultimate say.
Good.
Mayor, thank you, sir. I was going to bring up the parks maintenance, and it's under deferred maintenance, and I'm not sure that the 500,000 is enough to stop the slide, much less to actually make progress on deferred maintenance. It could be, but, and if it is, I'm not sure that it would get us where we want to be fast enough either, so I would encourage the council to be open-minded about adding more to parks maintenance so that we can, get back to where we need to be and then continue that level of care going forward. Still under the bullet point of deferred maintenance, the fourth item there is Camelback Ranch capital repair and maintenance, $1.7 million. Now, is this catching up on deferred maintenance, or is this our contractual obligation? It seems high to me. I think the council's desire is to hold the line on our expenditures at Camelback Ranch.
Mayor, City Council, Councilmember Turner, I think I can weigh in on that a little bit. We have had an allocation of, I think it was 836,000 or so every year, and we work with the stadium crew with reference to trying to lay out at least a figurative 5-year program. I think because when you look at the field replacements, which are very expensive, we'll be able to show you during the budget presentations the justification for those costs. I think it's probably better through the budget process to break that out for you in as much detail as you would like.
Okay, Mayor, Mr. Friedlein, 836,000 was the number that was stuck in my head, so I was wondering why we were at twice that number. And I don't doubt that field replacement's expensive. Everything out there is expensive, but I also want to make sure that we are holding to the tightest letter of the contract out there, and we're not absorbing costs that truly belong to Major League Baseball. So it's not just a cost of the repairs that we're doing, but it's also being closely in communication with our legal department to make sure that we truly are obligated for each and every dollar we spend out there. Thank you.
So with the revenues and expenditure assumptions, I'm just going to focus on the fund balance section of this chart right here. But before I do that, you do see the beginning fund balance, the operating revenues, operating expenditures, net transfers, and contingency, and then the yellow highlighted line is the total surplus or deficit for that fiscal year. So what that means is beginning fund operating revenues less expenditures is the total surplus or deficit. For fiscal year 2021, the ending fund balance is at that 82.8 million. We did assign through the fund balance strategy presentations, council assigned a fund balance for the sales tax revenue stabilization of 5 million. Also for the highway user revenue fund for pavement management, 2 million. And assigned fund balance for mega events of 1 million. And the assigned fund balance for the general fund capital projects are the unspent balance for the fund balance strategy and the funding for the capital improvements for the various things like the parks, community centers, and things like that. So the estimated unassigned fund balance for fiscal year 2021 is 57.9 million. For 22, the assigned fund balance, you'll see that for the mega events, there's an additional million assigned, and that's for the final four. With the ending unassigned fund balance of 53.9 million. And at the end of the 5-year forecast for fiscal year 2026, you see that the unassigned fund balance is 52.4 million. It does assume that every year the contingency is spent. So you see the 2 million, the 3 million, and so on. If we don't spend the contingency, then that would put back every year about 3 million for a total of 17 million if you include fiscal year 2021.
Excuse me.
So general fund summary, hold the line on costs, continue with the temporary hiring freeze, continue with reducing temporary staffing. We've limited essential travel, and we're closely monitoring revenues and expenditures. We'll continue to watch the economy closely, and if things get worse, we'll consider reductions. And with that, I'll turn over the last part of the presentation on the special revenue funds and also enterprise funds to Ms. Lindsay.
Mayor and Council, I'll be going through the special revenue funds and the enterprise funds 5-year forecasts. Special revenue funds are legally restricted, and the Transportation Sales Tax Fund and Highway User Revenue Fund, both of those programs are capital intensive, and those capital plans will be updated during the upcoming budget process. The revenue assumptions that we used for the special revenue funds, for the Highway User Revenue Fund, we reviewed information from the Department of Transportation regarding their forecasted revenue growth assumptions. Our forecast is relatively conservative and shows conservative growth. Our growth assumptions are slightly more conservative than those of the Department of Transportation's, and that's due to November revenues being slightly lower than the same time last year. The Transportation Sales Tax Fund and then the Public Safety Sales Tax Funds for both police and fire use the same assumptions as the general fund. The first forecast that you see before you is the Highway User Revenue Fund forecast. As Lisette mentioned, the beginning fund balance, operating revenue, operating expenditures, capital outlay, and contingency when you add those items together, you get to the total surplus or deficit, which is the yellow line. As you can see throughout this forecast, the HERF revenue fund does meet its targeted fund balance. HERF revenue increases by approximately 2% in fiscal year 21-22, and then increases by an average of about 1.7% throughout the remainder of the forecast. This forecast also includes about $3.2 million for pavement management. Moving on to transportation sales tax. The total surplus deficit for fiscal year 2021, so the current fiscal year, is approximately $7.3 million, leaving an ending fund balance at the end of the current fiscal year of $52 million. The revenue assumptions for transportation sales tax equal those of the general fund. Revenues increased by an average of 2.3% over the 5-year forecast. As you can see in the forecast, they are meeting their fund balance throughout the 5 years. And the transportation sales tax expenditures include about $7 million for pavement management through fiscal year 24-25, and that dollar amount increases to $8.6 million in fiscal year 25-26. Moving on to public safety sales tax for police. The revenue assumptions again for public safety sales tax equal those of the general fund. The revenues increased by an average of 2.3% over the 5-year forecast. And as you can see in fiscal year 21 and fiscal year 22, and also in fiscal year 23, there is a planned drawdown of fund balance. And those items go towards additional items needed in the police department. Moving on to public safety sales tax fire. Again, the revenue assumptions equal those of the general fund. The revenue increases by an average of 2.3% over the 5-year forecast, and there is a planned drawdown of fund balance in fiscal year 23 and fiscal year 24. So in summary for the special revenue funds, we will continue to hold the line on costs. We will also continue to watch revenues in the economy closely and manage capital outlay so that each fund stays within their fund balance policies. The enterprise funds include water, sewer, solid waste, and landfill. They are primarily supported through user fees or charges. The funds operate much like a non-for-profit business. Revenue assumptions, there are nominal enterprise, we're showing nominal growth throughout the enterprise funds. And the revenue assumptions within the 5-year forecast assume only council-adopted rate increases. Enterprise funds typically have more capital-intensive operations, and the financial target for working capital is used as the financial target for the enterprise funds. This is the difference between current assets, cash, accounts receivable, and current liabilities and accounts payable, and it's an important metric used by the bond rating agencies.
Mayor, members of the council, I just wanted to let you know and kind of elaborate on that a little bit. So for the other funds, when we look at sort of their financial condition, we're talking and looking at and discussing fund balance. For the enterprise funds, this is the first time we've shown you what their actual measure is, which is a number called working capital. It's sort of a financial or accounting type of term, but it is what the rating agencies rate our bonds on when they look at financial metrics. And if you'll recall, several years ago when we did our rate study, we worked with the rate consultant and our consultants from RBC to set certain financial targets for the enterprise funds, particularly for water and sewer. And these are the metrics that that are included in the financial policies for those funds. So we thought it wise to start using that as the target instead of fund balance, because this is actually what the financial policy says, that we will meet these working capital targets. So this is the first time this year that you'll be seeing working capital instead of fund balance.
Mayor, thank you. Ms. Rios, several years ago, council adopted a schedule of rate increases for the enterprise funds, typically water, and sewer. And I believe it was a 5-year plan of rate increases. When does that 5-year plan terminate?
So, Mayor, members of the council, excellent question. We did do a 5-year rate study, but council adopted the rate increases in 2-year increments. So you adopted 2 and then 2 more. We, for a total of 4 years. We are in the process right now of doing a rate study again, and we'll be bringing that forward. Water Services is going to have a workshop with the council specifically about that and the timeline for that. But we have a rate study going on now, and then we'll keep council apprised of how that's going and what rates are looking like for any future increases.
Thank you. And that is where I wanted to offer some comments. I will not support rate increases, at least at the present time. I live on an acre irrigated, so I rely heavily on irrigation water for most of the vegetation on our property. And even though our water consumption has gone down year over year, what used to be a $70 or $80 bill, which may not seem high to some people, during the summer months is now over $100, and yet we're consuming less water. I have heard from others, constituents as well, who are dismayed at the increase in water especially, because we all need water. We all rely upon water desperately. So unless it is an extremely compelling case, I will not support further rate increases, and I think it's time we gave our ratepayers a break and did not. And the model is an assumption in an increase in rates. That's a given. Well, it's a given that this council member will not accept. Thank you, Mayor.
Mayor?
Go ahead.
Thank you, if I may. On the water and sewer slide, we have, or had a moment ago, I think. You explained the change from the fund balance concept to working capital, and which is the second line up from the bottom. The bottom line is what our policy says we shall keep in working capital. And basically in the, we fall out significantly. We barely fall out of the policy in fiscal year 22-23, where we don't have reserves to match our policy. We're at only half of what projecting half of what we should have the following year in reserves, and then we actually fall into negative dollars the year after that. And then by the time we get to fiscal year 25-26, we're over $25 million below, that's $25 million actually in the red, not just below our policy, but even if our policy was zero, we'd have $25 million shortfall, as I understand it. What does that mean for the future regarding either our ability to deliver water or ability to maintain a level rate?
Mayor, members of the council, we hadn't actually had a chance to kind of go over this slide, and so if you'll give me a chance to do that now, then I'll answer that question for you. So this is the slide that kind of shows the water forecast. Again, council had adopted rate increases through January of 2021, and so the last of the adopted rate increases is shown here in 2021, and then you get, the cumulative effect of it from the years thereafter. We highlighted some lines for you. The first is bond proceeds. Though that shows capital borrowing for the second line that is highlighted there, which is the capital outlay, and then contingency. So the first thing, similar to what Ms. Camacho said about contingency in the general fund, if you don't, the math here works assuming that you spend your contingency. If you don't spend your contingency, you'll add about $17 million over the entire forecast back into the fund balance. So that's part of it, and water doesn't typically spend its contingency. It's there in case they need it, but if they don't, then it won't subtract and take out of their fund balance. If you want to go to the next slide. This is something that, in looking at the forecast, we will remind council, I think, of something that we've said in the past, in that this working capital target can be managed. And here, the way that you manage it is some combination of these four things. I already mentioned limiting the use of contingency. You can defer your capital improvements to later, which allows you to borrow less. You can borrow more money and put it into your fund, which increases your working capital. However, again, doing that causes the need to adjust rates. So as we go through the rate study that is currently underway, we'll be working through that, those models and bringing them back to council, and it will require some decision making. So you'll get, you'll be able to see what the plans are and the justifications for those capital projects, but you'll be able to make decisions about each of these sort of things, which is the way that you manage this water and sewer fund. So hopefully that sort of answers your question. We don't, obviously, it may not be obvious, but I don't think any of us think we're going to allow the fund to actually go negative. So it will have to be something that we need to manage.
Mayor, if I remember correctly, when we had our last rate discussion, the program that was presented to us was very aggressive. And I believe projects were prioritized. And if I remember correctly, there were projects that were in dire need of immediate capital outlay. But I also remember a word that was used during the course of that presentation, which was redundancy. And the part of the goal of the water program was to build in redundancy. I contend that there may not be a need to defer capital improvements, but perhaps stretch them out over a longer period of time. Instead of spending $50 million in 1 year for some major improvement, that 50 might be able to be stretched out over 2 years or 3 years. I believe that there is a way to deal with the water capital improvement program, and I believe we can do it to the advantage of the ratepayer. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. My question is on these operating revenue assumptions going forward. Is that assuming that we do not do another rate increase? Is that what we're looking at?
Mayor, members of the council, for the purposes of this forecast, that's correct. The adopted rate increase was for January, and that's in this fiscal year. And then beyond that, we haven't assumed any additional rate increases.
Okay, thank you.
For the solid waste enterprise fund, the solid waste revenue does include council-approved rate increases that were effective January 1st of 2021. The revenue growth assumptions are conservative for the solid waste fund. Capital outlay includes the purchase of equipment for solid waste, and the forecast does not include assumptions for equipment or personnel costs related to additional growth. When new housing developments are added, the need for additional resources may require a solid waste rate study. For the landfill enterprise fund, landfill revenue includes nominal increases for growth, and the forecast demonstrates the need to issue debt to support their capital program in fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 24. The amounts listed in the forecast are within their current bond authorization limits. So the summary for the enterprise fund, we will continue to hold the line on costs. We will also continue to watch revenues in the economy closely. We will manage the capital outlay plans to minimize debt service. We will also plan for future debt issuance if necessary and ensure the responsible timing of rate adjustments. And as Ms. Rios mentioned previously, the water rate study, there's a consultant that's currently on board for that. The rate study is scheduled to be completed sometime in the spring of '21. Public outreach will occur in the summer of '21, and the notice of intent and consideration of approval will be in the fall of 2021. And with that, we'll wrap up the presentation with the budget calendar.
Yeah, hold on one second.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I didn't see in your timeline there for the rate study that it coming to council, or hear it actually, not see it. But before it goes out to the public, we're gonna get a recommendation from QAC, I believe.
Mayor, members of the council, absolutely. These were just the high-level big targets, but yes, built in there is time with council throughout the study and time with QAC, so.
Okay, thank you.
And with that, this is the budget calendar, and the next budget workshop will be on February 2nd, 2021, and we will cover GEO bond funded project prioritization. That concludes our presentation.
Thank you. Okay, I guess we'll go on to item number 3.
Pension funding policy.
Mayor, members of the council, as we kick this next presentation off, this is one of the things that are probably least fun for those of us in this room, in that we're going to be discussing a problem that we think we need to be addressed, that nobody in this room created the problem. And so these aren't necessarily easy conversations to have. However, I think it's, the responsibility of the leadership is to always to lead the city in better hands when our day kind of comes to a conclusion. And so what we're going to be talking about today is I think, something very promising. Staff has worked really hard with our advisors on this. Just want to be clear, this problem wasn't created here. It took literally some decades to kind of cause the problem. It was legislation that was outside the purview of the city. They had no control over it, that drove a lot of the conditions that are here. But that being said, we're going to be attacking this on behalf of our citizens to maximize and make sure that how we address this issue is thoughtful and that it makes solid financial sense. So with that, I will hand this off to our Assistant City Manager, Vicki Rios, who will then take you through the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Phelps. I'm actually going to turn it over to Ms. Camacho, and with her, she has the city's controller, Rebecca Chitwood.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. This presentation will cover changes to the pension funding policy that the city is required to adopt annually per the Arizona state statutes. With that, I'll turn over the presentation to Ms. Chitwood. She'll be leading the presentation today.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of council. Today, we're going to go over a view of the background, the pension funding policy, and then seek feedback and go over the next steps. So a little bit of background. Arizona House Bill 2018 passed into law on April 3rd, 2018. It codified into Arizona Revised Statute Section 3886301. It requires municipalities to adopt a pension funding policy for their PSPRS programs. The policy must be adopted on or before July 1st, 2019, and annually each year thereafter. And from this point forward, we'll be bringing forward the pension funding policy each year as we adopt the budget. After it's adopted, the policy must be posted on the city's public website for citizens to view. pension funding policy must include objectives that address the following. And before I go into the items, I want to note that we utilize the League of Arizona Cities and Towns template to create our pension funding policy. And we worked with the city attorney's office on this policy as well. So the items that the funding policy must address are how stability will be maintained with the programs for the required employer contributions, how and when funding requirements will be met, and we also have to define the funded ratio target and a timeline for reaching that target. And I will turn it over to Ms. Camacho for the next slide.
Arizona revised statute allows for a one-time increase in the amortization period to a maximum of up to 30 years. The City Council adopted resolution number R19-70 on June 25, 2019, that established the city's pension funding policy. With that resolution, the City Council requested an increase in the amortization period up to 25 years to provide budgetary flexibility during periods of economic decline or recession. The 25-year amortization should have started beginning with the June 30, 2019 actuarial report and continuing on after that. But to this day, the Public Safety Retirement Board of Trustees have not taken a formal action or to approve or deny the city's request to increase the amortization period up to 25 years. With that in mind, we're required to adopt this pension funding policy every year, and until the request is approved, the unfunded liability is still being calculated using the 20-year amortization period. This is currently the subject of a current litigation. I'll turn over the presentation back to Ms. Chitwood, and she'll go through the assets and liabilities that we are required to adopt as part of the pension funding policy.
Mayor, I have a question on this slide before we move on, because I recall adopting that resolution, and I don't remember exactly what the resolution says, but I think it was our intention to have the option, which is why we made the request, but we were going to continue planning for 20 and paying a 20-year amortization, right? So this hasn't, I mean, and the fact that that hasn't changed really doesn't affect what we're doing, essentially.
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Tolmachoff, yes, you are correct. It did state in the previous policy that the council plans on paying the unfunded liability within the 20-year amortization period.
Okay, thank you.
Part of our pension funding policy is to get our funding ratio goal to 100%. This is targeted right now by June 30th, 2037. And this is based off of the June 30th, 2019 actuarial evaluation that is done. Council plans on using the 20-year amortization period to make this happen, maintain required contribution payments from the operating funds, and it formally accepts assets, liabilities, and current funding ratio of assets of $300 million, unfunded accrued liability of $271.8 million, and right now our current funded ratio of 52.5%. This does not preclude the city from making additional contributions if council so desires to do so moving forward.
And Mayor, members of the council, I'd like to elaborate on that last statement just a little bit, and something that Mr. Phelps alluded to, in that the city's currently working with its financial advisors from RBC on something that we'll be bringing back to the council here probably fairly soon, on a plan to potentially pay off this unfunded liability using some type of financing mechanism. A couple of different cities within the state have successfully done this. The city of Flagstaff, for example, has moved ahead with that type of financing. And I believe the city of Tucson is also looking at something similar. So we are looking at it. Again, we're working closely with Kurt Freund and his team at RBC to bring something forward to the council for your consideration of a way to reduce this liability, and you'll be seeing that come to you fairly soon.
And at this time, is there any council feedback? The next steps is the resolution to adopt our funding policy, which we'll be bringing forth on January 26th. Are there any further questions?
See none.
That concludes our presentation. Thank you.
Item number 4.
Council selection of vice mayor.
Mayor, members of the council, here to provide staff report is Deputy City Manager Brent Stoddard.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So this is the item that comes before you each year pursuant to the Glendale City Charter and consistent with your own council guidelines. At the first workshop of each January, the council determines a vice mayor from among the current membership. So essentially, that vice mayor serves from January to January. This evening, there's an item placed on the formal voting meeting where a member of the council can make a nomination, and then the council can vote on the selection of that vice mayor. For purposes of the workshop today, this is simply an opportunity for the council to publicly say who they plan to nominate or would like to nominate, and for the council to have that discussion, but no decisions or consensus need to be made at this point. Those formal actions will be taken this evening at the voting meeting. With that, Mayor, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Mayor? Thank you, Mayor. I intend to nominate Councilmember Ian Hugh this evening.
Mayor, I would like to second that this evening.
And we're not voting or second.
No, I know, I said I would
Certainly
like to
can do
second
that.
second that this evening.
Okay, very good. Okay, any other discussion? Thank you. City Manager's report.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, a couple different items I'd like to update you on. The first is our transportation team has been doing a phenomenal job of working in our downtown area to spruce up a lot of deferred maintenance. What they've been doing is really focusing a lot on the black metal items that have kind of been worn over the years in a lot of our signage. This includes like our bollards, our sign frames, tree cages, handrails, et cetera. The Murphy Park clock has been addressed, street light poles. And the area we've really been focusing on is 57th to 60th Avenue and from Myrtle to Lamar. And so staff put together some pictures. I can show you more detailed pictures on here. But these are the types of examples of things they've come in and addressed with the crew. They've used a contractor to do a lot of this work. And again, if you get a chance to kind of walk around downtown, I think you're really going to see a lot of improvement. And again, just our thanks to the transportation department for kind of coordinating the work that was being done there. Another project is a new weather camera. Now, you may say, why is that important? My wife and I, each morning, we normally turn on the local television and we watch our news. And oftentimes we're somewhat horrified when they show the picture of what's happening in the valley and they use the shot of Glendale, and it's a large vacant farmland. And so we've been working with our team, and we've located a new camera on top of City Hall. And this will be used by local CBS affiliate channels 3 and 5 as their view of Glendale when they say this is what the weather is or what's happening in Glendale. We're very excited about this. This has been kind of coordinated by our public affairs team, although facilities and IT had a role in it. We've installed a very high resolution camera, so the pictures will be crisp and will look good. And we think this will show off our Murphy Park and our downtown really well for when the media is choosing to use shots from downtown. So again, that's been a project I think kind of long overdue. Good news is that the United States Department of Treasury has announced a release of about an additional $25 billion in new emergency rental assistance to cities. as part of their most recent COVID response package. And since our population is 200,000 or more, we'll be eligible to receive those funds. As you know, our community services team did just a great amount of work to get money into the hands of our citizens who are most vulnerable and most needed. So we'll be anxiously awaiting those funds to come in, and we will immediately be going back to work to make sure that we can distribute those monies to our citizens. The final thing is, again, the COVID is with a lot of things is required us to kind of continue to adjust schedules and calendars, and we are still working on the Live at Murphy Park series, but what we've decided is that we don't see a scenario where March, we would be ready for March for people to gather. So what we have kind of put is a tentative date to start in April. We'll continue to look at that. But if it doesn't happen in April, we'll look at the month of May and kind of so on. But for now, we will make sure that the Public Affairs team announces to the Chamber and to our downtown businesses that we don't envision kicking off the Live at Murphy Park series in the month of March. And that does, we now have an update by Mr. St. John that'll be talking, giving a brief update on the COVID vaccination response. And so with that, Mr. St. John.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager, Mayor, members of the council. You've heard the news that the State Farm Stadium is a new point of distribution for vaccinations. I think some in the room even have signed up. Registration opened at 6 a.m. yesterday. Monday, we had about 75 law enforcement attend and get vaccinated. And we're continuing to see good numbers of people getting vaccinated. The city manager and I are working on a plan to help encourage our first responders, public safety primarily, to get vaccinated. There's a lot of fear, a lot of misunderstanding of what the vaccine is in our community, and so we want to dispel those fears, answer questions as best we can, and encourage people to get vaccinated. We also received information from a lab that wants to locate at 61st and Bell Road to do rapid COVID testing. We know that there are some concerns with the rapid testing. We're seeing a lot of false positives, which is not as bad as false negatives, which we're also seeing. And so the state and county health are looking at why their results aren't as accurate as they should be, and we're hoping to correct that and get better testing into our community. And that's the update I have. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you. City Attorney's report.
No report, thank you.
Council items of special interest. On the agenda is the council items of special interest. Each council member has the opportunity to indicate topics that they'd like to have discussed by this council in the future. So we'll start with Councilmember Oldham. Do you have any?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So I've noticed in downtown, but this, I think it's citywide. I don't know the appropriate name for this item, but I'll refer to them as newspaper boxes, for example, the New Times and La Voz and other individuals who have these boxes out that have newspapers in. Most of the time, they're not serviced. Some of them are vacant, they're painted on, they're trashed, they're turned over on the side. So I'd like to find out from staff, do we have to have those in our city? And if the answer is yes, is there some type of regulation that regulates them? That can come back to us in a memo, and if it's extensive, then bring it back to a workshop, but we can start with just a memo to the council. And then secondly, just another request, probably my third request, that items of interest get recognized as appropriate per policy. I've got two of them out there. One has not returned with regard to homelessness. And the second one is already over 30 days and haven't even had a call for scope of work. So I believe the policy states 5 days after the request. And so we're just getting way out there on some. It just depends on how important they are till they come back. So just a reminder to get those service. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Clerk.
Thank you, Mayor. I have several.
Microphone.
Thank you, Mayor. I have several items. First, Mr. St. John mentioned State Farm Stadium and the ability to get vaccines. I signed up immediately as soon as the site was open yesterday morning, and I'll be getting my vaccine shot tomorrow at noon. And I would say this to the public and to staff, If I can survive a vaccine shot, so can you. And I would encourage everyone to, if you have not gotten the shot, to make plans to get it. It couldn't be more convenient at State Farm Stadium. The site is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So I would encourage all, especially our first responders, police and fire, there is nothing to fear. Please sign up for the vaccine if you have not already. My 2 items of special interest. One, I believe is being addressed, and I just want to publicly acknowledge that I believe our intergovernmental department is contacting other cities to find out their response to our current spate of fireworks. It seemed this year it was worse than it's ever been. And the complaints I got, and I'm sure the rest of council did as well, got numerous complaints. We get the complaints, however, the police department does not. Citywide, the police department received 57 complaints. And yet, I probably received 20 of them alone in my district. People are not calling, and the reason they're not calling is because they know that nothing will happen when they do call. I had suggested to our intergovernmental department that they contact other cities and see if there's any support with other cities to put together some kind of amendment to the current state fireworks package that might better address some of the issues we seem to face not citywide, valley-wide, with regard to the whole issue of fireworks. So that is just a public acknowledgement, and I'm sure we will hear something from our intergovernmental department in the future. But my second item of interest is something that I think we need to work on as soon as possible. Every 10 years, the nation is involved in a census taking. And I believe we will be getting the results for the city of Glendale this spring, most likely in April. So it is time to redistrict once again. The last time that we did it, I believe, I can't remember the name of the company, but I remember the name of the gentleman who was the consultant. His name was Dr. Hislop. And I would like staff to bring back to us as soon as possible a report on how we plan on handling redistricting for the city, and if it is our intent to hire a consultant. And if Dr. Hislop is still around, I would recommend him highly. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Hugh?
Nothing, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Tomchoff?
Thank you, Mayor. I had mentioned earlier that I was going to be bringing forward, I'm actually amending an existing council item of special interest where I had requested a citizen survey following the bond election. But I think, and I've been talking to some people who recall previous bond elections and doing some digging, Glendale we've had lots of successful bond elections in this city. So I think the historical information on how we approached the bond election would be valuable. I've never done this before. I think most of us have never taken on something like this. So I think looking at how we've been successful as a city in the past would be really valuable to us. And the kind of things I would be interested in knowing is how many people were on the committee? How was the committee selected? How was the information presented? Did the citizens have an opportunity to provide input into it? How many bonds were on the ballot? You know, was 4 too many? How many, have we passed 4 bonds on the same ballot before? And what was the timeline for success? I think we've had lots of successful bond elections, and I would be interested, hopefully the rest of us would be interested in knowing what was the template that we used for success in previous bond elections, and we should use at least some of that as our framework moving forward before we do anything else. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Turner?
Thank you, Mayor. As we will all note, the synchronicity between Councilmember Clark and I continues remarkably. The fireworks was on my list of items of special interest. not only did I personally witness what seemed like downtown Baghdad during the Iraq War in my neighborhood, it apparently went on throughout my district and was a hot topic in emails as well as next door. So I would like to have us have a report from staff regarding how many complaints they received, how many they responded to, any citations that might have been issued, but more importantly, some ideas about how we might better manage this going forwards. I don't know if, just as an idea, you know, I know we have the spot shutter technology, and it actually is designed to specifically pick up the sound wave from gunshots. I don't know if that type of technology is available that would pick up perhaps a broader sound wave that fireworks would emit, and then whether or not that could be a portable type arrangement that could be moved out around the town from night to night prior to the major event, and find out, you know, where this is originating from, and let's call it educate our residents about the law and what's legal and what's not, and the fact that the fines begin at $1,000, and if it's between the hours of 12:30 a.m. and 7 a.m., it begins at $1,500 fine. So we need to do something better. If our motto is to improve the lives of our citizens every day, then this is one place in which we can do it, on those, particularly on those holiday days of the year. It's a big problem, and it is rubbing our citizens raw. And then the other synchronicity is, as I recall, I had raised redistricting as a council item of special interest a couple of months ago, and apparently, like Councilmember Aldama, I've not been contacted about it by staff to follow up with my my request and to begin, you know, putting something together that can come back to council. So Councilmember Clark, I will join you in both of your requests. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Vice Mayor.
Nothing today, Mayor.
Okay, and then I'm going to ask the city manager, would you like to introduce our newest member?
I would be more than glad to introduce. Is he here?
I thought he was sitting back there somewhere. I got a podium here. I thought that was the top of his head.
Give me a second here. I'd be more than glad to introduce the new member of our leadership team. Many of you know him because this is his second time around back here in the city of Glendale. And so Jamshid Mata is now our new Director of Development Services, and we're very excited to have him. I tell the story that that Jamshid had left the city before I got here, but there was a consistent, when people would talk about kind of what was going on in Glendale prior to my arrival, when people would talk about Jamshid, it was always with just such positive experiences. And so I kind of made a mental note. I think my second ACMA contract, I got a chance to introduce myself, and we've maintained contact since then. And when this opportunity came up, and it worked well with his schedule and with the city, we were able to add him on. As you know, he was city manager of a very nice-sized city in Marana, and did a phenomenal job there. However, he kept his residence here in Glendale all those years. His wife and his mother live here in Glendale, and so we're thrilled to have him back here. But maybe just I'll have him introduce himself, Mayor, if you'd like.
Mayor, members of the council, and City Manager Phelps, it's a pleasure to be back to good old Glendale. And I mean it in the sincerest sense. While I've been away for about 7 years in the other jurisdiction, my other eye has always been on this community and trying to follow and see what's going on and how you really moved the bar up from where it used to be in a budgetary sense, but also looking at it from the morale of the staff and the spirit on the council, and all of that has been so positive. The opportunity arrived, and as Mr. Phelps said, it was perfect timing for me, and here I am. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Well, welcome, and I'd sent you a text when I found out, as soon as I found out, but I couldn't be more pleased. Welcome.
Thank you, sir.
So with that, I do have a special interest myself. I am requesting that Presiding Judge Nick DiPiazza fully vet and report back to this council by the end of February 2021, a working plan to implement a veterans court within the city of Glendale court system. That's all I have there. Can I get a motion to go into executive session? I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor vote aye.
Aye.
Any opposed vote nay. Appears the ayes have it, do have it. This council meeting is recessed.